In the summer of 1897, a road grading crew working a county contract on the Mound Road southwest of Miamisburg, Ohio broke through the top of an earthen mound that had been graded and regraded for 20 years without anyone noting what was inside it. The crew foreman was a man named Jacob Stern, a German immigrant who had been doing road work in Montgomery County for 11 years and who had, in those 11 years, broken through the surface of 4 previous mounds along Ohio's river corridors without finding anything more significant than compacted earth and ash. This mound was different. The blade of his grader struck something solid at a depth of approximately 4 feet and skidded sideways. Stern stopped the team. He dug by hand for 40 minutes. What he uncovered was a human skull. He could hold the circumference of the skull with both hands, and his fingertips did not touch. He called his crew over. They spent the next 3 hours excavating by shovel, and by the time they stopped for the evening, they had uncovered a complete human skeleton lying in full extension, arms at its sides, legs straight, in a burial position that was clearly intentional. The skeleton measured, by Jacob Stern's direct measurement with a carpenter's rule borrowed from the wagon, 8 feet and 3 inches from the crown of the skull to the heel of the right foot. The bones were dense. The femur, Stern later told the Montgomery County coroner, was nearly as thick as his own forearm. The teeth, still in the jaw, were double-rowed, 2 complete rows of molars where a normal human jaw contains one. Jacob Stern had no reason to lie about any of this. He was a foreman on a county payroll with a family in Miamisburg and a reputation that depended on his reliability. He reported what he found to the Montgomery County Sheriff's Office the following morning. The sheriff came to the site. He looked at the skeleton. He sent a telegram to Columbus. A representative of the Ohio Historical Society arrived at the mound site 4 days later. The skeleton was crated, loaded onto a wagon, and transported to Columbus. That was the last time Jacob Stern or anyone else in Miamisburg ever saw it. The official record of what happened to the Miamisburg skeleton after it arrived in Columbus is 3 sentences. A receiving log at the Ohio Historical Society, dated August 14, 1897, notes 1 crated specimen from Montgomery County Road Survey, Providence Mound Road Mound Site. A second entry, dated September 3, 1897, notes specimen transferred per instruction. The instruction is not named. The destination is not named. No inventory number was assigned. Jacob Stern's report to the sheriff, which described the skeleton's measurements and the double-rowed dentition, is in the Montgomery County Sheriff's records for 1897 at the Ohio Historical Society in Columbus. It has been there since 1897. The specimen log's 2 entries are in the same archive. The skeleton itself has never been publicly displayed, never been referenced in a scholarly publication, and has not appeared in any subsequent Ohio Historical Society inventory, catalog, or accession record. It was received. It was transferred. And then it ceased to exist in any record that the public is permitted to examine. Before we go further, if you find these buried investigations as fascinating as I do, hit subscribe so the next one finds you when it drops. The algorithm suppresses this kind of research unless you tell it otherwise. To understand what Jacob Stern found beneath the Mound Road in Miamisburg in the summer of 1897, and why a human skeleton measuring 8 feet 3 inches with double-rowed dentition vanished from every official record within 3 weeks of its discovery, you have to go back not just a few years. You have to go back to 1848, the year the Smithsonian Institution established the Bureau of American Ethnology and began, under the leadership of its first secretary, Joseph Henry, a systematic program of mound excavation across the Ohio River Valley. The Hopewell and Adena peoples who built the mounds of Ohio are among the most extensively studied pre-Columbian cultures in North America. Their earthworks are documented. Their pottery, their copper ornaments, their mica carvings have been excavated, catalogued, and displayed in institutions across the country. What is not displayed, what is not catalogued in any museum currently accessible to the public, is a category of remains that field archaeologists employed by the Smithsonian and by state historical societies documented with notable regularity between 1848 and 1910, and that the official archaeological record has since treated as though it never existed. That category is human skeletal remains of anomalous size, not marginally above average, not the natural upper range of human variation. Remains measured at 7, 8, and in several documented cases 9 feet in total length, found in intentional burial positions within mounds that the Smithsonian's own excavation reports describe as primary interments, the central. Most significant burials in the mound's construction, placed there first and surrounded by secondary burials and grave goods. These are not disputed measurements. They are in the Smithsonian's own published annual reports, available through the Library of Congress for the years 1877 through 1904. They are simply not discussed. The first annual report of the Bureau of Ethnology to the Secretary of the Smithsonian Institution, published in 1881, contains a section on Ohio mound excavations, authored by a field archaeologist named Cyrus Thomas. Thomas was not a crank. He was the Bureau's lead mound excavator, a meticulous field scientist who supervised more than 2,000 excavations across the eastern United States over a 20-year career, and whose published reports remain, to this day, among the most detailed primary sources available on the Hopewell and Adena traditions. He was also, importantly, a skeptic. In the early years of his mound survey work, Thomas had argued publicly against the then popular theory that the mounds were built by a race separate from the indigenous populations. He was a mainstream scientist defending a mainstream position. He had no theoretical agenda that would lead him to fabricate or exaggerate anomalous measurements. What he reported because it was what his measurements showed. In his 1881 report, Thomas described excavations at 3 Ohio sites, near Newark, near Chillicothe, and near Portsmouth, in which human remains of unusual stature were encountered in the primary burial position. He gave measurements. The Newark remains measured 7 feet 2 inches. The Chillicothe remains measured 7 feet 9 inches. The Portsmouth remains, found in the deepest burial layer of a mound that Thomas estimated had been under construction for at least 300 years, measured 8 feet 1 inch. Thomas submitted these findings through the Bureau's standard reporting process. They were published in a federally produced report. They have been available at the Library of Congress since 1881. They are cited in exactly 0 current textbooks on North American archaeology. This is not a theory. These are the Smithsonian's own published reports, available at a federal depository library in every major American city. The measurements are in those reports in Thomas's own hand. The mound sites are named and GPS locatable by cross-reference with county survey maps of the same period. What is not available, what has been consistently unavailable since approximately 1910, is the physical evidence those reports described. No museum in the United States currently holds a human skeleton measuring 7 feet or more attributed to a North American mound excavation. Not one. The Smithsonian's own collections, which include hundreds of thousands of skeletal specimens from archaeological contexts across North America, contain no publicly cataloged specimen from an Ohio mound context that matches the measurements in their own published field reports. Before we move further, if this is the kind of investigation that matters to you, subscribe and ring the bell. We pull these threads every week. If you've ever stood at the edge of an Ohio earthwork and felt that the official story of who built it is incomplete, you belong here. Miamisburg was not an isolated case. It was not even the most significant case in its own decade. In 1879, a physician and amateur archaeologist named Dr. James Robinson excavated a mound on his own property near Chillicothe, Ohio, and found 3 skeletons in the primary burial layer. He measured them. The largest was 7 feet 11 inches. He wrote a 40-page account of the excavation that was published in 1880 by a small Ohio press. He sent a copy to the Smithsonian. He sent a copy to the Ohio Historical Society. He preserved the skeletons in his medical office, packed in sand in 3 wooden crates, for 19 years. In 1899, 2 years after the Miamisburg skeleton disappeared into a Columbus receiving log, Dr. Robinson died. His estate was administered by his son, who wrote to the Ohio Historical Society asking what he should do with the 3 crates. The Ohio Historical Society replied, by letter, that it would send a representative to collect them. The representative came. The crates were transported. The Ohio Historical Society's incoming specimen log for 1899 contains no record of their receipt. Dr. Robinson's 40-page monograph is in the Chillicothe Public Library. The letter from his son to the Ohio Historical Society is in the estate probate records at the Ross County Courthouse. The Ohio Historical Society's response is in the same probate file. The crates have never been accounted for. In 1883, the Wisconsin Archaeologist, the official journal of the Wisconsin Archaeological Society, published a report by a field surveyor named Moses Emerson describing the excavation of a mound near Lake Delton in Sauk County. Emerson found 6 skeletons in the primary burial chamber. He measured the largest at 8 feet 4 inches. He submitted the skeletons to the state of Wisconsin for disposition. The Wisconsin State Historical Society received them, assigned them a case number, and recorded them in the incoming log for March of 1883. The case number was never referenced again in any subsequent inventory. In 1891, a mound excavation near Dunleith, Illinois, supervised by a field agent of the Bureau of American Ethnology named P. W. Norris, produced a skeleton measured at 7 feet 6 inches with what Norris described in his field notes as supraorbital ridges of unusual prominence and a cranial capacity considerably in excess of modern norms. Norris's field notes are at the Smithsonian. The skeleton is not. Ohio, 1897, Miamisburg skeleton, 8 feet 3 inches. Double-road dentition, transferred from the Ohio Historical Society to an unnamed destination and never catalogued again. Ohio, 1879, 1899, 3 Robinson skeletons, largest at 7 feet 11 inches, transported to the Ohio Historical Society and never entered in their receiving log. Wisconsin, 1883, Emerson's 6 Sauk County skeletons, largest at 8 feet 4 inches, received by the Wisconsin State Historical Society under a case number that disappears from all subsequent records. Illinois, 1891. Norris's Dunleith skeleton, 7 feet 6 inches, described in Smithsonian field notes and absent from every subsequent Smithsonian collection inventory. This is not coincidence. This is a pattern, and it spans 4 states, 4 separate institutional chains of custody, and more than 20 years of consistent disappearance. The Smithsonian Institution has never adequately addressed several specific questions. It has never explained why the measurements documented in its own Bureau of Ethnology published reports, 7, 8, and 9 feet in human skeletal length, are unrepresented in its currently accessible collections, despite those collections containing hundreds of thousands of skeletal specimens from the same excavation contexts and time periods. It is never explained why the receiving log entry for the Miamisburg skeleton reads transferred per instruction without naming the instruction's source or the destination. It is never explained why P.W. Norris's field notes at the Smithsonian describe a 7-foot 6-inch skeleton from Dunleith, Illinois in 1891, and the Smithsonian's own collections contain no specimen matching that description. Why did the Ohio Historical Society's receiving log for 1899 contain no record of 3 crates of human skeletal remains transported to it by the Robinson estate, when a letter in the Ross County probate file confirms the society had agreed to receive them? Why would a federal scientific institution publish, in its own official annual reports, measurements of human skeletons ranging from 7 to 9 feet in length across dozens of documented excavation sites, and then allow every physical specimen those measurements describe to vanish from its collections without explanation, catalog entry, or public acknowledgement? Why does the most powerful natural history institution in the world, which has spent 150 years telling the American public what lived on this continent before European contact, have no publicly viewable specimen that matches the measurements its own field scientists recorded in its own published reports? These questions do not go away because institutions refuse to answer them. But here is what makes the Miamisburg case different from every other account of a disappeared giant skeleton in the Ohio River Valley. In 1934, 37 years after Jacob Stern's grading crew found the skeleton on Mound Road, a woman named Clara Stern, Jacob's youngest daughter, gave an interview to a reporter at the Miamisburg Gazette. She was 61 years old. She had been 7 years old in the summer of 1897. She remembered the day her father came home from the mound site. She remembered that he had been quiet at dinner. She remembered that he had gone to his workshop after the meal and stayed there until she was called to bed. She remembered, because she had been curious and had followed him, that he had been writing. Not in a work ledger, in the back of a small red notebook he kept in his coat pocket, the kind used by foremen to track crew hours. She said she had not seen that notebook again after the representative from Columbus came to the house 3 days after the skeleton was taken. She said the man from Columbus had sat at the kitchen table with her father for approximately 1 hour and had left with the red notebook under his arm. She said her father had told the family, that evening, that the matter was closed and they were not to speak of it to anyone. Clara Stern was not inventing this. She was a 61-year-old woman describing a memory from childhood. The Miamisburg Gazette interview ran on April 4, 1934. It is in the Miamisburg Gazette archive, which is held on microfilm at the Montgomery County Public Library. The library still has the microfilm. The microfilm still has the article. Jacob Stern's original report to the Montgomery County Sheriff, the one with the measurements and the description of the double-rowed teeth, is still in the Montgomery County Archive. The receiving log entry is still at the Ohio Historical Society. Everything that confirms the skeleton existed is still where it was left. Only the skeleton itself is missing. The mound on Mound Road, southwest of Miamisburg, is still there. It was not fully excavated in 1897. Stern's crew reached one burial and stopped for the evening, and the Columbus representative arrived before any further excavation took place. Ohio's mound inventory lists it as Mound 14, Montgomery County Group C. It has never been professionally excavated. It has a current protective designation under Ohio law. That designation means no one can excavate it without state permission. That permission has never been applied for by any archaeological institution in the state of Ohio. Not once. Not in 126 years. The skeleton that Jacob Stern measured at 8 feet 3 inches on a summer evening in 1897, the one with the double-rowed teeth and the femur as thick as a man's forearm, was the primary burial. In mound construction traditions of the Hopewell and Adena cultures, primary burials are the first and most significant interments. They are placed at the mound's base before any other burial and surrounded by the most elaborate grave goods. If that skeleton was the primary burial, whatever surrounds it at depth has never been touched. No one has asked to look. No one in any position of institutional authority has ever explained why. These records survive because people refuse to stop asking. If you've made it this far, you already understand that the official story of who lived on this continent before recorded history is built on a selective use of the evidence that the institutions responsible for it collected, measured, reported in their own published documents, and then allowed to disappear from every accessible collection without explanation, correction, or public acknowledgement. Jacob Stern's red notebook is gone. His sheriff's report is still in the Montgomery County Archive. Clara's 1934 interview is still on microfilm at the Montgomery County Public Library. The Cyrus Thomas measurements are still in the 1881 Smithsonian Annual Report at the Library of Congress. The mound is still on Mound Road. Subscribe and share this with someone who has visited an Ohio earthwork and taken the museum brochure at face value. The measurements are in the Smithsonian's own published reports. They have always been there. Next week, I am following the career of Cyrus Thomas, the Smithsonian's own lead mound excavator, the man who published the anomalous measurements in the 1881 annual report, through the 2 decades that followed that publication. In 1894, Thomas published a second major report on the mound builders that contained no reference to anomalous skeletal sizes, despite the fact that his own field notes from that period, which are in the Smithsonian Archive, contain 15 new measurements above 7 feet from excavations conducted between 1882 and 1893. The 15 measurements are in the notes. They did not make it into the 1894 report. Thomas retired in 1895. He died in 1910. He never publicly explained the omission. Someone in that archive made a decision between 1893 and 1894. You won't want to miss it.